and it shifted in the opposite direction. And Teresa, certainly you guys can chime in on that as well when it comes to after they did the downzoning with Plan Maryland and tier maps. A couple years later, they tightened the screws on how much our municipalities can grow with the TMDL, the total maximum daily load. And so, unless that changes, many of our towns are already at their max, I believe, right? Oh, actually, we're going live here. So I just want to
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at this early hour. I hope everyone is reasonably safe and managed to get where they need to go this morning. I'm going to turn this over to my co-chair to introduce our guests. And this is going to be a discussion, really not a series of presentations. So please feel free to chime in with your thoughts and questions, and we will be discussing the little teeny topic of housing this morning. So
thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Delegate Zeeler. And it looks like I'm having a little bit of technical difficulties here. I just lost my screen, so I don't know who's on and who's not yet. I'll try to fix this, but I will kick it off for everyone. And I appreciate everyone getting getting up early this morning to join us. This is obviously a very important topic for many of us, and this is one of those topics too that's really nonpartisan. And I think we can all. Most of us can agree that housing is a challenge, and part of the reason why housing is so expensive is just we just don't have enough of it. But there's also other factors that go into it. It's not just that simple. There's the cost of construction. So we have some folks here who hopefully can talk about that. There's some costs that go into it that are borne by our local governments through zoning and the some transfer costs and that sort of thing. And then some of it is done by the state. I remember 15, 20 years ago when the pendulum was going in the other direction. We're trying to slow down growth, and then the state they passed a couple of pieces of legislation, some was through regulation, that did a lot of downzoning to slow down growth with Plan Maryland, tier maps, and Secretary Flora will also be on the call. I don't know if she is yet or not, and also
He
Secretary
is,
Jake
yes.
Day.
He's
They can
here.
certainly talk about that. And so what that did, it did slow down growth. And then a couple of years after that, we passed the total maximum daily load, TMDLs. And what that did is it really restricted our towns from growing. And so they couldn't expand their wastewater plant because they couldn't get permitting in order to do that because of the TMDL. So all of these things collectively, among other things, it really does drive up the cost of construction, and it also really does limit our towns and our counties from being able to grow. So, that's sort of the most obvious obstacles that we have right now. Um, but I will, Secretary Floor or Secretary Day, I don't know if you guys want to make any comments before we shifted on to uh, Teresa with MML and also Kevin with Mako.
Good morning, everyone. Secretary Flora here. Rebecca, Eastern Shore neighbor. Good to see everyone this morning. I'm very excited about the Rural Caucus, having a conversation, I think, around rural areas and how to address these big issues we're dealing with the state are not a one size fits all. And the rural areas have particularly different types of challenges, I think. And you're delving into a big one, obviously housing. There's no simple answer. I can, there's a lot of great people, good friends on the call that
Madam Secretary, your internet
I
is breaking up a little bit. You may have to repeat what you just said.
know have really great information to share. Thing is that is the key is there is no simple answer. I'm sorry, is it my network connection? I am on the Eastern Shore, iced in right now, so we'll see.
It's
Can you hear me
better,
now?
yes.
Okay, well, we'll just do our best here. Um, the housing challenge, particularly in rural areas, I think is multifaceted. It is something that's grown over the years. I would say, Delegate, to your earlier comment around down zoning and tier maps, actually, what we've always wanted to do is focus development into population centers so that there's less sprawl cost, because there's a lot of cost with, extending sewer lines and a whole variety of issues. We have done some analysis, and I want to acknowledge Dave Dahlstrom's, who's on the call. We have a couple other colleagues on the call who has put together some of our numbers that we have around, for instance, sewer capacity in some of the rural areas. We have all of that. I can follow up with you and provide that with you. But as one of my previous lives before I took this position was as a housing developer attempting to do challenges. Some of it was local zoning, some of it was absolutely sewer capacity, some of it is the cost, as we all know, around both labor and materials. Impact fees are all over the place in different jurisdictions, and that's a huge issue. Density, nobody likes to use that word, but to the extent that we should be looking at the number of units per acre, because it's an economies of scale. If you can, in the population centers, have more units per acre, which actually people often, we find in the new markets, like, because there's walkability built in, there's more access to economic, value that people are looking for, particularly in small towns. So there's a whole list that I think we could delve into, and there's a lot of folks that can delve into, but I just really wanted to, from my vantage point, let you know that we absolutely will follow up with some, the data we have around, for instance, that David Dahlstrom in our office and others have worked on around, the available EDUs, the capacity that we know that we track in different areas, in the rural areas, the rural counties. And, on average, we're trying to get a handle on units per acre and what is allowed. And that is a local zoning to determine how many units per acre. Often we find that if you can do 3 units per acre versus 12 units per acre, the land cost changes, the overall common costs and shared costs. We need to change that whole model. We also need to change the methodology, I think, around what we call EDUs in terms of the calculations, because we have water efficient fixtures now. So we're overly conserving in the methodologies of some of these calculations. So I'm just going to paint that landscape. Happy to go into detail on all of that, but I want to make sure we hear from some of the other folks on the call, because this is a really important conversation. And thank you so much for convening it and inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you. So much to dig into there. So, but let's move on.
Secretary Day.
Yeah.
Secretary Day, just I know you just got on, and I apologize for the late notice on this. But what we were talking about are the challenges that we faced over the last 20 years. And you were former mayor of Salisbury, and so you were in the trenches for quite a while. And so you certainly understand the challenges that our towns face when it comes to expanding housing. And we talked about with the down zoning about 15 to 20 years ago of tier mapping and Plan Maryland, and it was done for a reason. And Secretary Flora did a great job explaining why, because we want to steer that growth toward infrastructure, and that makes sense. Now the challenge that we have is once we did that, and then we really tighten the screws on our TMDLs. So it made it a little bit more challenging, well, a lot more challenging, I should say, for our towns to grow. But we were wondering, I know that you guys have some legislation in. I was hoping that you might be able to share in that, and also talk about, certainly your view on the challenges that we face and some potential solutions to our housing crisis here in Maryland.
Good morning, Delegate Grice. Thanks so much for having me here today. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Great to be with you in the caucus. A couple of things that I'll do. One, I want to start off by saying, I realize that the Eastern Shore isn't all of Maryland, although it's uniquely special to you and I. But before I served as city council president and mayor, a planning commissioner in Salisbury. Before that, I worked as director of an organization that did community planning, comprehensive planning, and urban design with small cities, towns, and rural villages across the 9 counties of the Eastern Shore. And one of the things that I, was able to see through that process was, the strengths of our small towns, and I think that applies to the rest of rural Maryland, but also the opportunity that existed to grow in really sensible ways that supported the sustainability, economic and financial sustainability of those towns, and of the counties within which those towns sit. Later as MML president, see Teresa's on. Good morning, Teresa. I was able to work closely with cities and towns across the state to experience again, those hopes and dreams and the limitations and challenges presented by our tax structures, presented by our relationship with state government, and of course beyond. So, today, where I sit, I want to say a couple of things building on what Secretary Flores said. Number one, I want to note that I think the key to financial sustainability of our communities, of course, is building in such a way that what we build can sustain itself and can pay for itself. And when we build at a low density, when we build disconnected from our towns, it's not like it's not as if we're preserving something positive culturally. I mean, we can build it in a moderate density way that is just like our beautiful towns, East Newmarket or Centerville, or Chestertown or Goldsboro, or you name it. But what we can do is make sure that we're putting in such a way that it's able to pay for the infrastructure it requires, the roads, the pipes, et cetera. And every inch that we extend those things, that we don't have tax dollars coming back to pay for those things, both capital and maintenance. We stretch ourselves to a point where it's not going to work financially. There's a guy out there, an engineer, civil engineer, a good friend of mine, Chuck Marone. He's come to the Eastern Shore 6 or 7 times now, from Strong Towns, is his organization. He calls it the Great Ponzi Scheme, and it's the idea that any development will pay for itself. And the truth is, there's development when we do it right, it can pay for itself. What we're witnessing, and what I see as Secretary of Housing now, is that since 2008, we have been on a trajectory of not building as many housing units as the market demands, and not enough to replace what we're losing, and not nearly enough to keep up with the population trajectory and growth needs of the state of Maryland. Now that hits each community differently, of course, but what we're seeing is that it affects virtually every community. One of the places that I would encourage you to look is first our housing needs assessment that we published in July 2025 in partnership with the National the National Center for Smart Growth, Research and Education at the University of Maryland. And the subsequent report that fits hand in glove with that uses our data and builds on it, which is the Comptroller's Housing and the Economy report published in November 2025, each of which speak to the landscape of housing production in our state. The first report really shows you the trajectory of each community, and the second gives you a sense of how we compare to other states, which I think is particularly important when you think about us being a state that has significant domestic outmigration. So the people that are here, the people that have grown up here, whether those are young people, able to choose their first place that they're going to live in the workforce as they enter the workforce, or people that are retiring. They're picking somewhere else. And a part of that, in fact, polling continues to show the number one reason behind that, according to the Maryland Association of Realtors poll each of the last 3 years, is housing affordability, or unaffordability, as it were. And so what we're attempting to do is recognize that this is not a uniquely Maryland problem, although we perform pretty poorly. The comptroller's report speaks to some of the issues behind that. It emphasizes that there is a primary issue behind that, and that it is within the control of state elected officials and local officials to address that. And then what we also recognize is that it's a national problem. This is essentially the same arc that every state began on post 2008 financial crisis, where a real estate driven financial crisis led to fewer housing units being built, and you can understand why. But it's one that's only been exacerbated through the pandemic, and it's one that hasn't gotten better in Maryland. So in 2014, if you look at kind of the trajectory of housing development, if you look at what a comparably sized state like South Carolina saw, and this is highlighted in the comptroller's report as well, is they've gone from producing about 14,000 housing units per year that year, as was Maryland, to about 44,000 housing units per year. The effect of that is that they have a increasing rate of rental vacancy to about 10%, still within a healthy margin. But what it's meant is it has significantly depressed the rent price increases and housing unit for sale price increases. And so as those numbers soften, that's where you get affordability from. And it's netting about $500 a year in the pocket of those South Carolina residents versus Maryland residents. And we have produced still about 14,000 housing units per year, 14 to 18,000, depending on the year, the last 4 or 5 years. And so the result of that is that it's just getting more and more expensive to live in Maryland. And look, we can identify lots of aspects of affordability. I know there are concerns about taxes. There are concerns about energy prices. There are concerns about consumer prices. But what I'm going to tell you is, housing is where we put most of our money. It's our biggest asset, or our biggest cost per month when we pay our rent. And so it affects people's pocketbooks differently and bank accounts differently. And so we have to address this. So when we look at the landscape of variables, when you look at interest rates, the cost of money, when you look at insurance costs, when you look at labor market, supply chain, inflation and tariffs and the effect on prices of materials, and you add all these things up, even short-term rentals and institutional investors buying up single-family homes, all of these things, there's one other variable that is not the province of federal government, that is not the province of anyone else but us, and that is the regulatory environment. And in Maryland, it stacks into something that is becoming impenetrable, which has added double the soft costs induced on a housing unit, on creating a housing unit over a state like Texas or South Carolina or Florida. And by the way, these are states that are actively working to address their own housing affordability issues. So as that landscape changes and other states begin to chip away at parking minimum requirements and single stair zoning reform and single family home unit size and lot size, and whether or not attached dwellings or multifamily can be allowed in single family zones, or trying to create regulatory certainty, they are getting a leg up on states that are already outperforming us. They're figuring out how to do even better, and Maryland, frankly, is very slow to catch up. So the last 3 years, what we have essentially done is said we are attempting to address what is the number one variable, which is the regulatory costs induced on housing development, and address this issue with state law. I believe that housing affordability is an issue of statewide public policy importance right now. Obviously, the governor believes that as well. I believe the General Assembly demonstrated that as well with the Housing Affordability Act of 2024 being adopted and signed into law later. And then last year, the Housing for Jobs Act did not advance past the Senate. And this year we have a couple of bills. The governor has the TOD bill, which focuses on about 300 acres of state-owned land proximate to transit stations. We are carrying a bill called the Starter and Silver Homes Act. This is directly focused on the landscape, the variegated landscape in Maryland of requirements that require a large minimum lot size or a large minimum home size, vestiges of of septic system rules and also of how we built historically, but not reflective of what we want to put in growth areas, the areas where we should be putting higher density development, and also recognizing that in the arc of somebody's life, there are two times when housing affordability is helped being achieved by size of the home, which is when somebody's leaving mom and dad's, look at that for that first home, starter home, and when they're becoming an empty nester. So later on in life, when they don't need as much house as they've got, and freeing up that larger home for a growing family by having more smaller units available assists at that point in the market too. And then we've got the Housing Certainty Act, which is focused on addressing what we think was the key version. The Housing for Jobs Act was actually modified pretty significantly in the House last year, and ended up being what we're proposing today, essentially, which is the Housing Certainty Act focuses on Maryland being a late vesting state, which addresses two things. One, people invest in an environment of certainty. When you tell people the rules and then they play by the rules, and then you stick to it and you allow them to build after they've played by the rules, kind of makes sense. And that's the second aspect, which is just government fairness. I don't think it's appropriate that government can say, here are the rules, we've adopted the law, play by the rules, submit your application, get your permits. Now you started construction. Wait, we want to change the rules. So either figure it out on the foundations that you built or start over. It's simply not government being a fair partner. So these things combined, I think, will be meaningful contributors to affordability. And here's the other truth. This is an iterative process. We haven't brought you silver bullets alone. Because I don't think silver bullets are even a starting point for these conversations. I think we have to take steps. These are two steps. So these aren't extraordinary, extreme efforts that will, I think, upset any apple carts. These are reasonable steps forward, which I think I've learned, that's what the General Assembly prefers, that we take reasonable steps forward to be clear with the marketplace what's changing. And I think this represents that same desire. Let's march forward, in a reasonable fashion. I think this represents two steps forward. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. Mr. Sartori, do you want to introduce yourself? And I'm curious if you would like to say, to address, in addition to anything, you want to say something about counties like Montgomery and Howard, where there is a lot of almost urban and then rural, and the two don't necessarily work together all that well.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Delegate Ziegler. I really appreciate being able to be here this morning. I'm Jason Sartori. I'm the Planning Director for Montgomery County. I appreciate also hearing the words from both secretaries. I think they were spot on with a lot of their comments about the things that we need to be thinking about as a state. I wanted to start by saying this is a very real issue. Even in Montgomery County, there are parts of our rural areas, including Damascus, where the average home value is higher than the average home value across the county. And some of the costs that we see in our rural areas are consistent with what we would have in an urban area. It might be construction costs or cost of labor, but there are some very unique costs that are applied in rural areas that wouldn't apply in some of our more urban areas. So even impact taxes, which we apply across the entire county, there's a $20,000 difference to build a single family home in our rural parts of Montgomery County than it is in our more urban part. And that's just a $20,000 increase in our impact taxes. And that's because the infrastructure is more expensive. The impact might be greater, but that's a very real cost that gets passed on directly to the consumer. Things like septic testing, which can be onerous, and you could have multiple rounds of testing in areas with poor draining soil, and so where you have soils that don't support septic systems, the extension of water and sewer can be very expensive for 1 or 2 homes that you're building. And unless a forest conservation exemption applies, a forest conservation plan, reforestation, afforestation, all of those requirements may add a lot of cost to a project as well. So I think Secretary Flora talked about the idea of population centers, and our rural areas have those activity centers, places like Poolesville and Damascus, where we have a concentration of people, of jobs, of commercial, of activity. And I think we need to kind of invest in modest growth in those types of activity centers. It could bring about, the desired amenities that we want to see there, improve walkability in those kind of small town center areas, add some road safety, build some great public spaces, and bring new people to help support the local businesses there, and maybe bring in some new retail. But it's got to be modest growth. And places like Damascus and Poolesville can meet that demand for new housing, but they don't necessarily have the infrastructure capacity for significant growth. So it's got to be modest. They lack connectivity and access to transit. And so things like investing in opportunities to better connect some of those communities can help maybe release and allowing some modest growth in those areas can kind of help tamp down that upward pressure on pricing that we're seeing in some of those communities.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I also I do want to be sure that we also talk about Western Maryland and not just the Eastern Shore. I think the challenges are different, and I wonder if somebody, perhaps a member of the committee or anyone who would like to talk about what's different in the other parts of Maryland that are rural but not the Eastern Shore.
I'm happy to jump in and give a little bit of landscape of the cities, towns, and villages across the state, as I'm Easton in Southern Maryland. So I also have 3 kids here. I'm hoping will not run into this room while we have this conversation because they're not in school at all this week, it feels like. So MML represents 161 local governments, incorporated cities, towns, villages, and special taxing districts across the state. We do have a number of cities and towns out in Western Maryland, Southern Maryland. 113 of our members are less than 5,000 residents. So we're the rural organization, if you think about it. I know Rural Maryland Caucus, I think I saw Charlotte join the call as well. Most of her benefactors who receive that funding are our members. When we look at MML, what are we as a whole? We have 88 law enforcement agencies, 78 wastewater systems, 90 community water systems. We have 42,000 municipal workforce across the state and 3,500 elected officials. And why does that matter when it comes to housing? Housing is the only way we can actually pay those folks, and we can actually run it. Our housing authority is property taxes. That is our only revenue authority for Maryland and for our municipalities. We have 25% of the state's population in municipalities across the state. We only have 5% of the land. That is a large challenge when we are expanding and adding housing. When we look at the roads, which is also part of the work that we do for the state, HUR is another battle, not today. But we do want to talk about those real needs and those real requirements when it comes to housing. I'd like to also point out on the call, I have Angelica Belli-Capardi, who heads up housing for us. And we talked about different backgrounds in the past. I was with the Maryland Realtors before this role. Angelica was with MDBIA before this role. So we have a unique perspective coming into this to help our municipalities and help them expand housing. But I will tell you, in Maryland, housing is happening in municipalities. Population growth, Jake mentioned, Secretary Day mentioned the Comptroller's housing report. We're also seeing population growth only in municipalities in the state of Maryland, 8% compared to unincorporated areas. That's a big difference. And the housing values in municipalities are 13% higher than unincorporated areas. So those are some big details that we have found in the last couple of years doing our own research independently to find out how housing in municipalities is different than those in counties. So I just wanted to give that larger landscape. Western Maryland is certainly a different area. We have a couple of towns out there. I'll mention Grantsville. They've done an amazing job with a public-private partnership to bring housing to that community. They're bringing in a new workforce area. They've worked with that company to create, I think, 150 homes in a community of 900. So we do see our municipalities really working hard to bring housing in. They know that there's a role there for them. So I just wanted to share an overview landscape and allow the committee to keep asking questions. And thank you to both chairs for allowing us to be here.
Thank
And
you.
Madam Chair, Dom Mako, if I can jump in on that. I think zooming in on Western Maryland is really prescient here, especially considering Secretary's Day example when he's talking about South Carolina. So Western Maryland, the three counties that kind of make up the panhandle, are surrounded by Pennsylvania to the north, West Virginia to the west and south. And the one thing that we hear constantly is that local jurisdictions, no matter what tools they have in their toolbox, cannot compete with neighboring states. When it comes to taxes, when it comes to regulatory requirements, most of which are mandated by the state, because local jurisdictions are trying to, especially in those areas, encourage as much economic development as possible, especially in the Cumberland area, the Deep Creek area, Washington County in particular. They are just getting pummeled by our neighbors because we can't cut enough, we can't do enough, we can't move fast enough. And now the recent weather events and the flooding have just exacerbated that even worse, and the unpredictability, are we going to get federal aid, et cetera. And so Western Maryland is really in a precarious situation because they do have Deep Creek, they do have mountains, but they are just not competitive. And to some extent, I imagine MML would agree with me, our local governments are shackled in what they can do. And so they are trying everything, but it's not enough.
So Dominic, are you saying for Western Maryland, generally folks don't want to move there for economic reasons, or they do want to move there, but they're challenged in building houses and affordable houses?
So the challenge isn't necessarily developing. Western Maryland, there's tons of great assets where you can either build new housing or you can go in and you can do redevelopment. Some of it's the economy, some of it's how, are the jobs there? Some of it is, even though you have, so like take the Cumberland general area, even though you have great properties that you can redevelop, if you go just across the river down into West Virginia, you're going to be paying a fraction of the cost to do that same redevelopment.
Now, if I could jump in, Mr. Chair, that's really a majority of our rural areas. So you look at Southern Maryland, Charles County, and Indian Head, if you know the military base there, most of those members who work in Indian Head live in Virginia, and they come across the bridge every day. We're seeing that in Delaware, where folks from Eastern Shore are going to Delaware instead. So I think that's a big challenge rurals have, is the map of where we are and going to another state with more affordability for the citizens, rather more than housing.
I think this is a good segue, actually. We do have the Maryland building industry on this call as well, and we do have Jim Schaefer with Schaefer Homes. So can you guys address the cost, obviously? So from your perspective, how are we not being able to compete with our neighboring states when it comes to home building?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. Lori Graff with Maryland Building Industry Association. We're a statewide trade association dealing with residential construction. I brought along Jim Schaefer, one of our board members, who's built in a lot of different areas in the state, and I'll let him kind of talk about what he's done. But I think all of these points are so well taken. I do want to point out that across the state, we've been talking about housing. Permit numbers are down; they're continuing to go down. So it's a real problem. I don't know. There is no silver bullet, as Secretary Day said, but we do need to make these baby steps and try to figure out some solutions. I will say, and Jim can talk more about this, every jurisdiction is different. There is no jurisdiction that's the same as any other jurisdiction. But one thing that I continually hear from my members for every jurisdiction is process. And the process is really just quite challenging. And that's not necessarily a state issue. It's much more a local issue, but it is something that it needs to be addressed, because that is the probably lower hanging fruit than some of this other stuff. Is if we could just get the process a little bit better, I think things would get done a little bit quicker. But I'll let Jim introduce himself, and he can talk a little bit more. And I know he's got a lot of experience in Southern Maryland specifically, so that may be helpful. conversation.
Sure. Jim Schaefer from Schaefer Homes. We're located here in Annapolis, Maryland. I grew up in northern Calvert County. I live on a farm in a marina in southern Anne Arundel. I'm also a commercial waterman on soil conservation for Anne Arundel. So I touch a lot of different industries, I'll say, in the state of Maryland, from agricultural to our waterways to home building. And I talk to a lot of these people in the different industries and their struggles to afford housing. Calvert in particular, where I grew up, has town centers, but it's been downszoned from 14 units to 4 units per acre in the last 12 to 24 months. I think Teresa is from Calvert County. She can probably attest to this. I talk to the local commissioners quite a bit. It is anti-business and anti-growth in Calvert. I build more houses in Calvert County, probably than most builders, which is not saying much, probably 30 to 50 homes this year. And that's probably about all the homes that'll be built in Calvert County. St. Mary's is a little more business friendly, I'll say. I've talked to some local commissioners and made some headway there. The permitting processes are the biggest problem. It is hard for me to get investors to back subdivisions, small townhouse subdivisions, anything like that, when it takes 5 years. It took me 5 years to get 9 townhouses developed. We still have not started in Prince Frederick. 5 years is a long time to wait for 9 townhouses. If you can imagine how much a townhouse has to sell for and how long it takes, how much money 5 years takes, it doesn't make economic sense. Charles County is similar, that there's not many permits coming out of Charles County. So I would say St. Mary's is the best example of you can get a subdivision platted, approved, and through in about 2 to 3 years. Calvert and Charles, you're looking at 5 years plus. With that being said, I have gone up to Cecil County. I presented to the town of Elkton. They're doing a very successful PUD up there, Southfields. I know some builders are already building there. I'm planning on doing a lot of small lots, 5,000 square foot lots with 1,800 square foot homes, starting in the mid 400s, 110 of those. That's the kind of housing that Maryland needs. I'm 37 years old. My phone rings off the hook from people I graduated with at Northern High School who cannot afford houses. Many of my classmates have moved to North Carolina. I just flew to Raleigh to look at that market 2 months ago because we can't build enough in Maryland. 14,000 permits there's almost 4,000 builders in the state of Maryland. There's only 14,000 permits. There's just not enough work here. So West Virginia was mentioned. I'm getting ready to fly out to Charleston, West Virginia in the next 2 months. The same developer who's building in Cecil County has entered the West Virginia market because the municipality is welcoming them. That is the challenges we face is not so much at the state level sometimes. I mean, there are challenges with forestation and things like that, but it's the local levels where they'll stall you out and just run you out of money. So I build from Cecil County to St. Mary's, which is a large swath. Matter of fact, I'm in Delegate Grist's area right now. We're on Kent Island. I have 5 permits in. We just tried to submit for review on Friday. They told me it was 8 weeks to review a building permit. Anne Arundel County is 10 business days. 8 weeks is a long time for a single lot in Kent Island. It's just that's a long time. It's 2 months, and I have feasibility studies that run out with these landowners, and then they get frustrated with the builder. So it's kind of a vicious cycle we get into with these timelines, and people won't let you work through the feasibility study because you can't give them a definite answer. Hey, you're going to get your money in 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. Sparrows Point took 9 years. There's just a long timeline for all of this, and it's the uncertainty is in the ambiguity is probably the biggest fear for almost every builder. And I can't bring investors into this state. I was talking to multifamily people. It is a no investment state for multifamily right now. Investors they tell you not to bring them projects in Maryland because of the uncertainty. That's disheartening. As a small builder, I have not unlimited funds like a public builder. So I really have to build my relationships on trust for investors. And if I don't return them their capital, they're not going to give me money to build homes anymore. So that's my short spiel. If you'd like to hear about any other jurisdictions I build in, we're in Bowie, Elkton, Middle River, I'm building in Lexington Park. We just broke ground on 44 lots in Lexington Park. Again, a perfect example of 6 to 10,000 square foot lots with 1,800 square foot to 2,100 square foot homes. I think we're going to start at 469. I would say that's probably one of the most affordable homes in Maryland for a single family home. And we do it all over the place, or try to. So that's our goal.
So when you say
Thank you so much.
469 and you say that's affordable, can you just give like a real quick breakdown of
Sure.
what goes
So-
into that, like material costs, the cost of the land and all the other fees and like I guess mandates that go into it, just real quick if you could.
Sure. So our impact fees, I would say on average around Maryland, or I won't say impact fees, the fees that come associated with homes, and Lori can probably back this up, it's around 15 to 20%. I think I saw 14.5% was the average cost per home in Maryland. So let's just say it's close to 20%. So if it costs me $300,000 to build a house, that's 50,000 extra dollars on top. So that basically $50,000 chunks will eliminate a lot of buyers. I mean, that's just, you go in $50,000 chunks, that's going to eliminate a lot of buyers. Now that all cannot be eliminated, but there is some excess in there that I think can be cut out, to be quite honest with you. I would say a $469,000 home, we will probably, the home cost will probably be around, let's just say 200,000. The land development by the end of it, the lot will be 150,000. So we're $350,000 into it. If everything goes, let's say, well, let's just say if it goes well, and I'm paying interest on the money, it's $5 or $6 million. I have a private investor from Baltimore investing in it. So I'm paying on that. And then we got to pay realtor fees. Our margin, if we make 20% on a house right now, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. In other states, it's a guarantee. With how much we have to pay employees in the state of Maryland, our overhead is high. We have a lot of expenses to keep people employed. So that's kind of the rough math. Let's just say 200 plus 150. And if you can start it in the mid 400s, if you can make 20% by the time you pay all the realtor fees, transfer title, all those type of things, it would be a success in my mind, which is you're basically at 20% gross margin. You're between 0 and 5% net for Schaefer Homes, that's one price drop away from not making any money. And I've actually made negative margin this year for the first time in my career on 3 homes. We built 31 homes. I've made negative gross margin on 3 homes this year for the first time. And I've owned Schaefer Homes for 10 years. So it's real for the business owners. It just as much as the citizens, the business owners are really struggling to stay here in Maryland. I know many, as well as you all, with the out migration for a lot of, I'll say baby boomers is serious. I see a lot of builders moving to Florida, North Carolina, Delaware, etc., which is not good. We need to keep those people here. We need to keep the talent here in the tax base.
Thank you, Mr. Schaefer. I see Delegate Hornberger has been waiting patiently. We have a number of hands up. So can I call on Delegate Hornberger?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to kind of speak to what I'll call the tale of two cities here. And Cecil County, thank you for illuminating that. We have some successes in our larger towns, and I imagine it's the same way across the state. Our smaller towns are dying on the vine, and for 2 reasons that I see. One is we have just unbelievable NIMBYism. I don't want any changes. I don't want any development. I don't want anything to change. And that translates up to the elected officials. They see the pressure and the uncertainty, and they're voting and in many instances, sometimes blocking because they want to be reflective of their citizenry. The second part is when you add that our small towns don't have the expertise to manage these projects, okay, it now becomes a 2-prong, basically attack on any development, any renovation. And although our larger towns have an engineer that's on site full time or can pay a person to manage these projects, small towns are barely making payroll. They're barely paying for administration of all the town needs. So when you couple these 2 things together, and this impacts, believe it or not, the Eastern Shore, and there's a lot of small municipalities in Prince George's County that are experiencing the same problem, you have an inability to do any development. Last year, the governor offered a transit incentive. Town of Perryville, second most populous town in Cecil County, and there's a rail station there. All of the ingredients are there to create a great cake and to have development. We've had between 0 and 3 permit applications in the last 2 years. 0 to 3. And that's just, as a person who grew up there, that's insane. We just can't get out of our own way. So my question for this group is, can there be a third party or a developer that comes in and basically does permit expediting, does the grants, does the TIFs, does all of these fancy things that we can do in these bigger towns so that we can have some development or some renovation in our small towns, because they're just dying. And that's more of a statement than it is a question. But that's what I see happening on the shore and in the small municipalities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Delegate Ahrens.
Thanks very much, and welcome. It's interesting conversation. I think we have a gorilla that's not in the room, and that's called MDE when it comes to development, at least in the rural counties. We have seen MDE pick and choose what counties can and cannot do certain things. At one point, Queen Anne's County was told that we could have 0 groundwater penetration, which it translated into if you had to go to septic, and you were on septic, that you had to replace it with a holding tank. I think that's a big consideration here, especially when you're building in the rural counties, because the infrastructure, Queen Anne's County has run out for the most part of any of the infrastructure they have available. And everybody thinks we're developing Kent Island like Glen Burnie. That's been the story. But as you move out, it's just not as easy to get those permits. I didn't want to take it up. I got another meeting to go to, but I appreciate this. Thanks very much. Good job.
Thank you very much. I think Secretary Flora was next. I can't hear you. You're on mute.
Sorry, I'm unmuted. First of all, I agree with everything that was said. And Jim, I was in those developer trenches trying to get deals done. You're absolutely spot on these issues. So the question is what are we going to do about it? Let me just offer a couple of things. One, I want to make sure that this group has, as I mentioned before, some of the real data points, some of the data points around some of the topics that were raised here, to the extent that we have that data available in terms of things like sewer capacities, densities, permits. We have some of that. So we will make sure we follow up with that information. Secondly, I want to raise up the governor's executive order on economic competitiveness that was issued in December of 24. There, as a part of that, is creation of the Maryland Coordinated Permitting Review Council Commission. I chair that. We weren't given a lot of time to get a lot done, but we are moving very fast and furious. That is focused on infrastructure and place-based type projects. So what we're talking about is in that mix. We have only 6 pilot projects, but we are using those as our pilot to really dig in to understand better, at least from a state perspective, the permitting landscape and what is going on. We're also looking at adjacent states to look at their systems and what they are doing, because we're getting beat pretty badly. And so I just want to offer up to this group to make you aware of the fact that our final report to the governor is due at the end of June. With that, we will have, I believe, a lot of the really good case examples, data, information, and ultimately recommendations. And so I really appreciate, some of the points made in this conversation. I would like to follow up more with some of those, because there does seem to be this divide between, well, what's the state and what are the local issues? And we're trying to sift that out, because there's a lot of delegated authority from the state to the local level. And we, with that, have not given adequate guidance in some cases. So there is a whole variety and spectrum of how that's being interpreted at the local level. I'm trying to sift through that And in the recommendations will include not only what the state can do at both a process, policy, and statutory level of recommendations. And we're engaging folks, like are on this call, Mako, the building industry, Lori, Teresa, I want to talk to you more about this. But we're also, as a supplemental part of that, looking at the local landscape. Because Maryland Department of Planning deals so much at the local level across the state, we're also capturing what's really going on the ground. And I totally agree, in the rural areas, there's just not always the capacity needed. There is NIMBYism. There are antiquated zoning codes. There's a whole variety of issues. So what I want to commit to this group to do is, as we work on that final report that is directed towards state first, we're also in parallel trying to get a handle on, we won't be able to go as deep, but the local situation, because it is all over the place. And so that's what we're doing. So those are the actions we're being taken, because I do believe we need that information, that data, to really understand, how do we deal with this from a regulatory standpoint? How do we deal with it from a process standpoint? So I wanted to just offer that up as a way towards getting towards, what do we do about this? Because I think we would all agree with a lot of what's been said. So thank you, and stay tuned. And I'll be reaching out to some of you further on some of these topics to get further insights for that report to the governor at the end of June. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Secretary. We are anxiously and hopefully awaiting really good ideas for both state legislation and enabling legislation that would help to fix these problems, not just in housing, but our goal is to help rural communities. So please do bring us your ideas. I believe Secretary Day was next, and we are really running out of time.
I'll be real quick. I was hoping I'd catch Delegate Ahrens before he left, but want to follow up on his point about MDE. It's not just MDE; it's also the Maryland Department of Health's Environmental Health Bureau, which deals with septic system approvals. It's State Highway Administration, and look, this is not me calling out my colleagues. These are they're hyper aware of this issue. These were identified in the governor's Housing Starts Here executive order published in September, which says essentially state government had better lead the way on addressing our regulatory obstacles presented to housing development if we want to ask for the entire framework of land use decision making to better address the obstacles to housing production. And so by March, they are required to implement third-party permitting, digital permitting, and concurrent permit review, which are 3 steps in the right direction. Again, kind of addressing the iterative nature of this problem that we got to keep taking critical steps forward. And look, lots of other great comments made. Delegate Hornberger, agree with everything you said, and Jim, agree with everything you said, and Jason, like I think, look, we're all on the same page about the scale of the problem, the things that need to be addressed, and I think we're not that far off from figuring out some reasonable solutions in 2026.
Thank you. Mr. Bertino.
Thank you. Worcester County Commissioner, listening to all this, we certainly have our issues with housing, but I was interested in what Mr. Schaefer had said about the $50,000 that he has to tack on to the price of housing because of costs that, if I understood correctly, have to do with state requirements. And I just want to make sure I understood that correctly, because I've heard an awful lot about, let's see what the local jurisdictions are doing, and we need to understand and I fear even take over some of the local functions of planning and zoning. But my experience has been that a lot of what the state does inhibits affordable housing, at least in Worcester County. And I was just curious, Mr. Schaefer, what some of those costs are that you're talking about. What come to mind are septic, fire suppression in housing, especially on septic systems, as an awful lot to the cost of a house. So I was just curious if you could flesh that out a little bit more.
Sure. So one thing that comes top of mind, because I just wrote a check for it, was forestation. I have to buy it from land banks. So on these, I'll call them spot lots or infill lots in Edgewater, Pasadena, etc. And it could be anywhere. You have to buy anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 worth of forestation for let's just say a 6,000 square foot lot. I'm sorry, but if you fly into the state of Maryland from BWI, you see nothing but trees, and you plant trees right next to these people's houses, or you have to buy it, and it grows right over top of the house. One, it causes mold, a life and safety hazard, and it's a big expense to plant. If I showed you how many trees we have to plant on a 6,000 foot lot, you would be out there with a chainsaw chopping them down the next day after I left. It's absurd how many trees we have to plant in a place that has mature forests. And we really don't need it on a 6,000 square foot lot. So let's just say that's $10,000. The average, I'm sitting in Anne Arundel County. I would say my average impact fee here is 17,000. Water and sewer each are 11,000. So that gets you to $50,000 pretty quickly right there. That's not accounting for the engineering. That's anywhere from $12,000 to $17,000. And the cost of the engineering is so much because we have stormwater management agreements. We have this forestation. We have there's probably 9 reviewers it has to go through, and it goes through anywhere from 2 to 5 times. So, the engineering cost alone is probably double what it should be, to be honest with you. So these things, $5,000 and $10,000, don't seem like much isolated, but when you add them all together, all of a sudden you're at $50,000 to $75,000, and that's across every county. And it's a blend of local and state issues. But I agree with Secretary Day that I think leadership starts from the top. If the state leads the charge on this, and MDE can help, and forestation and things like that, I think it sets the precedent for those local municipalities that the state is serious. And that they will follow suit. That's just that's my opinion.
I just want to add something very quickly, because we're definitely up against the clock here. We have about 3 minutes left. But Delegate Hornberger, to address your concerns, we do have a fairly robust, it actually could grow though, and that's the point of my comments, a circuit rider program in Maryland. And Teresa, you're nodding. I don't know if you want to expand on that too, but all across the state, we have basically third-party groups that are helping these towns manage their processes, and I say that they're robust, but they could grow, and they're going to need help from the state. And hopefully, Secretary Day and Secretary Flora, this is an opportunity, I think, that where the state, if we could help, especially with some funding for these circuit rider programs, that would most definitely help them. With permitting, it'll help them with their zoning. It'll help them with a lot of challenges that they face just because of their scale. And then also too, we also had some folks from Caroline County on as well, and hopefully we can get you guys back. I do apologize, we ran out of time, but they're certainly a testament to how to streamline permitting. They invested a lot of money in IT, and they've also integrated with that the health department. And I know that a lot of us we don't even know who the health department, the environmental health department, who they work for. To be quite honest, sometimes people get confused. Are they county government? Are they state government? They're definitely state government. Well, what agency? Is it the Department of Environment, Department of Health? And how are they held accountable? Because how you go across state or county lines, each health department sort of has a different take on what they require. So there's no consistency there either. So that's another concern that wasn't really touched on this, but I know that. Can you guys give me like 2 minutes from Caroline? I know we have. I don't know if you guys want to comment on that, Leslie, or I don't want to cut you guys out because I appreciate you guys joining us.
I defer to Crystal. She's the expert on that end of our planning department.
Okay.
Crystal, are you there?
I'm here. It's Crystal Dadds, Director of Caroline County Planning and Codes. Yes, some of the challenges that we do face are with some of the state programs, whether it be the septic constraints that we have, sprinkler requirements, energy requirements, stormwater, forest conservation. We could talk all day about all the requirements. I think in our jurisdiction in Caroline County, we do a really good job of streamlining our permitting processes to, adhere to a 30-day timeline for a single family dwelling. But when we have to contend with other outside agencies and regulations, that hinders our ability to allow people to develop, on a lot. And furthermore, Caroline County, we don't have public water and sewer. So that is our biggest hurdle in as far as growing housing. That's kind of my short version.
Or I appreciate that very much. And it's certainly, hopefully, again, this is a very complicated issue, but we have an all-star cast here today, and we appreciate everybody showing up. And Delegate Ziegler, I'll hand it over to you to close.
Yes, thank you so much. I think the good news is that we are starting to get our arms around the problem. It's going to be harder to solve it, but I think it's one piece at a time. And as I say, we are certainly anxious to try and do what we can. Clearly, we have regulations which are no longer serving us, or perhaps never did. Who knows? So it is time for the state to do what we can to fix the problem. So as I say, thanks so much to everyone, and hope to see you next week. Thanks again. Bye-bye.